Let's talk a bit about men's mental health and why so many of us sit and sort of suffer in silence. Why is it that so much of what men go through are sort of just swept under the rug and not really talked about? I want to go over a bit about kind of what I'm seeing in terms of this sort of modern era. I want to talk a bit about my experiences dealing with mental health, possibly some solutions that could at least help the situation. For me, in my experience, I've struggled with mental health throughout my entire life. There's been times where it's really bad, other times where it's not super bad. Growing up, my biological dad wasn't really in the home. I kind of grew up not technically with a single mom because I had step parents, but when you're missing a parent right there, that's causes an issue for you, right? Emotionally, mentally, that's going to be something that's sort of a loss in your life. It's not, you don't have a complete family unit. So there's nothing ever really traumatic that happened with my step parents. They were great people on both sides of the equation, but over time, they start getting into more and more arguments, and my parents and my step parents ended up, both of them ended up actually divorced. And so then again, it's like, oh, then there's another split. And at the time, at least I was mostly staying with my mom, she started to get sick. She wasn't doing well. And at this point, they had really been getting in a lot of arguments. She got sick and he ended up taking off. And so it was just me, my mom, and my little brother, and we had to just basically make do. I kind of had to step up at the time because I was a teenager. I kind of had to step up and become the quote unquote man of the household, right? Basically, that burden falls onto you of you are now sort of the one who's responsible for taking care of bills, taking care of the house, taking care of the family the best way that you can. When you grow up and you weren't really brought up under like a strong masculine figure and taught the right things, it's really difficult to do that because you don't really know how to do that. It was during this time that I really struggled a lot with my mental health. I was going through depression. I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of just doubts of myself and where I was heading. I was lost. I didn't have a sense of purpose or anything. All this time that I was struggling, there was no one for me to really turn to. I didn't want to burden my mom because she was sick and she was trying to recover, and she was struggling with the loss of the relationship, and I didn't want to burden, obviously, my little brother. He was so young at the time, he didn't really understand. And so I was kind of stuck in this position where my mental health was really bad because there was no one for me to turn to. And I see this as a general problem in society is we have a lack of role models, right? It's kind of like a lot of us grow up in the house without our dads around, without them teaching us the ways and the things that they learned. And so we kind of grow up either with single moms who, they're doing the best that they can, but they can't replace that figure, right? They can't replace that missing piece. And step parents, obviously don't do it because they're not your real parents. Like, especially if you were born and you had a step parent who raised you from birth, maybe it would be a little bit different. But like by the time you're like 5 or 6 and then like a new step parent comes in, and like if that happens a couple times, it's like, you don't look at that as, you don't see that as your actual parent, right? And so this kind of creates a problem in terms of role models because there aren't really any good role models. Now, luckily in my situation, the women in my family did the best that they could do to support me during that time. And obviously they did everything they could do, and really the only one I had as a role model was my grandfather. I'm really grateful he was there during that time because he was the only other man that I could talk to and relate to. The women were there, but like at the same time it was hard to really relate with that because it's just, you're coming from a whole different place, right? With me being the sort of like head of the household and trying to be that strong sort of like, I got to take care of things, be practical. I need other men to be able to talk to and relate with, So I'm really glad my grandpa was there, but even a lot of guys don't even have that. They don't even have like a grandparent or a cousin or uncle or something they can rely on. So because of that, a lot of us go online, right? And this is what I did. My grandfather, he was obviously a role model to me, but he had his own problems. He had his own business to be working on. I didn't really spend that much time reaching out just because I was just struggling so much with like my mental health and being depressed and everything. And so what happens is a lot of us, especially younger guys, we just go online, right? We go online, we start looking for how to fix this problem, how to fix that problem. A lot of what raises us these days is the internet, bro. Like we literally are kind of like half raised by the internet. Like so much of what I know comes from the internet. And so we just look for role models on the internet. And the hard thing about the internet is always the extremes come to the surface, right? The most extreme shit that you can find on the internet is what's always going to pop up on the surface. And so you've got this extreme between like these complete, like weak, pathetic men, right, to follow. Or you got the extreme of like the hyper masculine, you got to have 12 cars, 12 girls, 12 houses, 12 fucking $1 million. I'm sure you guys can think of who I'm talking about. or at least a few figures of who I'm talking about. But it's like always one of those extremes. It's like the super hyper masculine guy who like doesn't feel anything, and he doesn't even acknowledge mental health. Like mental health is like, bro, like what? Mental health? Like what are you, a fucking pussy? You know, like you don't even think about mental health. Like it doesn't even exist. Like my mind is just. It's just all the time like in war, like it's all the time like go, 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 ambition, drive. And so you have that extreme, and then you have the other extreme of the guy who's just like weak, pathetic, just kind of just gets like steamrolled all the time. And those are kind of the two archetypes that really rise to the surface on the internet. At least for me at the time, it was hard to find anybody who was somewhat in the in-between. It was hard to find a guy who I could take active advice from that was applicable to my situation and who wasn't on one of these extreme vectors. Like when you have those two extremes, you're in a really hard position, and the fact of the matter is I have to bring this up. I have to bring this up because it's a bit of a contentious topic, but it's going to affect you. If you're in a position right now where you're struggling with mental health and you're looking for somebody to talk to, you're looking for someone to turn to, and you can't find anybody, this is going to affect you. The fact of the matter is, in my life, I'm lucky in a situation where a lot of the women who were in my life, this wasn't as much the case. I still feel like maybe it did happen a little bit, but it wasn't as much the case, whereas for some other people it's way more extreme. But when you're dealing with mental health issues and emotional issues as a man, there is something that goes on when you try to communicate that with women and you try to let your guard down completely and show how vulnerable you are. A lot of times it doesn't go down well, right? It just does not go down well. They just lose. There's just something that they lose. They just lose some sort of respect for you. I don't know what it is. I think maybe it has something to do with biology, just that, if you're their mate, like they're expecting you to be strong enough to where, I don't know, like, I don't know. I think it might just be something biological where that's just how they're sort of designed, where it's almost like they look at you a bit with like disdain, or they look at you just with sort of disappointment that you're experiencing these emotions, right? And that you're crying in front of them, or that you've just completely lost it. There's just an element that shatters in terms of, I think, the sort of masculine figure fantasy ideal that they have of who you might be if you sort of break down. And so this becomes a big issue for men because they can't even necessarily trust that if they turn to the person in their relationship who's their romantic partner, that this might not go down well, right? It might not work. This might actually fucking backfire. They might lose respect. Like, I've literally heard stories, bro. I'm sure you've heard stories, been through this or heard of this, where a guy will break down, start crying, and in front of his girlfriend, and next thing you know, like, their relationship is just, it's over, right? The relationship just fails. It just falls apart because she wasn't expecting that to happen, or the expectation she had of who he was just shattered by that. And so this is where men get really trapped into this vicious cycle of mental health problems because they have literally nowhere to go. There's also the fact that we don't naturally, in terms of our biology, we don't really want to put that on women, right? We don't want to put that on the women we're close to. We don't want to have to burden them with our emotional issues, right? Like, in the situation that I was in, I didn't really want to have to burden my mom with all the sort of depression and anger and things that I was going through because she was struggling, and I didn't want to have to do that. I wanted to be the strong one who could take care of things. And I think that's just the case for a lot of guys, is we don't want to burden the women in our lives with our problems, but yet we still have these problems and they are real. Now, even if you have someone around you who's like, they can support you, it doesn't really bother them when you get emotional or vulnerable or weak, and it just seems like they can handle the burden of it. It's also just hard, just trying to explain your mental health issues and the things you're struggling with. It's hard to connect with a woman because biologically we're different in terms of sort of our imperatives and what we work on, regardless of what everybody says, oh, we're all the same. The fact of the matter is what a man is expected to do, and in terms of what has been done for millennia and us being sort of the protectors and providers, we have a whole different mindset in terms of what's expected and what we are expected to do and needed to do. So when you try to communicate some of these issues with women, it can also be difficult because you're not even on the same sort of wavelength, right? It's like it's almost like aliens like talking to each other, right? And so that's where you need other men that you can rely on so that you don't have to dump all this stuff onto, the woman that you're with. Now, you might be lucky enough to have someone who actually will listen to you and is good with you being vulnerable, and it doesn't like turn her off or like make her disappointed or whatever in you. But I know that there's a lot of guys out there who don't have that, and they struggle because they don't want to, have this happen where they open up and then the woman sees him as weak or incapable. And generally in society, that's what happens. You get seen as weak and incapable of any type of leadership or anything as a man. And it's just, I mean, I kind of understand, because I think that this comes all the way back down to just like biology and what we're expected to do. And I think that it just really comes down to society expects men to just essentially man up and get done what needs to be done, and that's it, and not put any extra burden on other people. So if you can't turn really to women, or you're not lucky enough to have someone around you who's able to really sort of help you work through those issues without, feeling like now they're in a bad position. Because the other thing I realize is too, is that when you become vulnerable and you enter into your more feminine space of showing your emotions and expressing things, women now have to take the opposite stance of being like the stronger one, right? They're now you're more in like your feminine, like weaker state. And so I think that might be what it is they have to kind of transfer into like a different energy or something. But it's definitely a phenomenon that goes on where if guys really start expressing their mental health issues, they really start expressing what's on their heart, whether it be with the relationship or whatever, a lot of women just don't do well with that. So then there is the pressure of just social media, constant social media consumption, and the expectations of society, right? We have it's just insane. Like even just since I've been alive, right? Like I'm in my 20s right now. And just since I was a kid, the rapid change that we've had in terms of social media, how much it's being consumed, all the people on there living these amazing lives, right? These outlier 1% lives. And that being the thing that gets the most attention, because like I said earlier, it's always the extremes that rise to the top on social media. And so you being someone who is on social media, consuming social media, you are always seeing the extremes of the extremes. You're always seeing the men who are like the top 1%, the multimillionaires. You're always seeing the women who are like the top 1% in terms of like their beauty and all this shit, that it fucks with your mental health, because then you go back to your life and you're like, dude, well my life is pretty shit. My life is pretty shit. And so then there's the expectation of what you need to do from society, saying, hey, you need to man up and you need to be this and be that. And then everybody's on social media seeing all these highlight reels of these, outlier people, or the people just literally faking it. And you just get into this really bad cycle with your mental health where you think that your life sucks, or that you're not doing well enough because you're not keeping up with the Joneses in terms of, social media. And it just creates such a bad environment for people's self-esteem. It creates such a bad environment for people's self-esteem, especially young men who think, oh, if I'm not a millionaire, then I'm worthless. If I don't, if I can't fucking get a girl, like my life is over, all these sort of things that really are accentuated by social media really fuck up your mental health. And that's why I try to limit, the usage of social media as much as possible, because if you just walk around in your town and you look at the way everybody's living, I'm not saying that you should live like you'd be fine with just being, a average person, but maybe you are fine living an average lifestyle. It's, what I mean? There's nothing wrong with living an average lifestyle if that's what your purpose is. I think there's a lot of pressure from social media, and there's a lot of pressure from the economic sort of just economic and societal expectation of men, right? It's men need to produce, men need to protect and provide. And there's nothing, I'm not trying to complain about this. I'm not trying to say that I don't want to do this or that we shouldn't do this. What I'm trying to get across is that the expectation that we are protectors and providers, kind of along with that comes the expectation that that's it, and we aren't going to burden society with the rest of any other problems we might have, right? Along with that comes the expectation that we don't really have that many emotions. We don't really have that many internal things that we're struggling with. And we're just guys, we're just out there, we're just working, that kind of thing. So it's like that sort of expectation puts a lot of pressure on a guy to stay in that lane and just pretend everything's fine, just sweep it under the rug, just be quiet about it. We don't want to hear it. All these sorts of things. And so what we end up doing is we just end up suffering in silence. So you combine all that with, there's the pressure from social media and everything that we're seeing all the time affecting our mental health. And then also think about, how the economy is right now. Like the economy for most of us, I'm talking about for the average person. Of course, there's exceptions, but for the average person is struggling right now. They're struggling to pay rent. They're struggling to just get groceries that are actually like decent groceries and they're not just junk food. They're struggling, they're struggling to just get like food in their car, or get food and to put gas in their car without freaking racking up a shit ton of debt. And so that creates more pressure because you're supposed to be the protector and provider, and yet it's so hard to be that provider in these times. It is very difficult for men to actually, either go to college and graduate without like a shit ton of debt with no job prospects. It's damn near, I don't want to say impossible, but it's very difficult and challenging to, buy a house these days on the average salary. A lot of people get college degrees and they end up getting stuck with minimum wage jobs. And so there's just so many factors that come about and really sort of put so much pressure on men to perform. And the thing is I think people just don't understand that the internal pressure that we deal with to perform and sort of be that ideal sort of picture of what society expects that a man should be, right? That you've got it all together, you're successful, you're not struggling with mental health or emotional issues, you're masculine, everything's all in order, So the combination of all these factors and the absolute shitstorm that it causes and the stress that it puts on men mentally, emotionally, physically, I think really sort of shows up in two different scenarios. So the first scenario I see is people taking the route of suicide. Now, I don't really like to talk about these kind of things because, I like to try to keep a more positive, moving forward, uplifting energy when it comes to my content in terms of what I put out there. But the fact of the matter is, in order to solve the problem and actually improve and actually get past the problem and overcome it, you do have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge the problem. And this is the problem I see also too with a lot of these people out here who are like, oh, just improve your life, bro. Just go to the gym, bro. All these kind of things is they almost are like refusing to look at the real fucking problem, right? They're refusing to acknowledge that there are real problems in your way. Yes, you can make it out. You can make it out. Self-improvement does work. You can make it out, but like, let's stop pretending that there aren't real problems. Let's stop pretending that there are, real stigmas that like don't exist. You know what I mean? Let's stop pretending that, there aren't stigmas that exist and that things men aren't suffering with. It's not just about, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and man up and you'll be fine, right? It's not as simple as that. So I don't really like to talk about these things, but I kind of have to at least acknowledge the problem, which is that yes, male suicide is a real thing and many men struggle with this. Many men struggle with this. I personally know some people and they've had times where they've either struggled with this or whatever. And, it's no wonder that with all these factors that this would be one of the scenarios that men take with the things that they struggle with. And, in the United States, it's like, I think from 1950, it's like 3 to 5 times the rate of women that men commit suicide. And, there's a reason for that. A lot of people will be like, oh, well, go see a therapist. And it's like, could you get any more like simplistic or, that's the thing is that a lot of people I think a lot of guys just feel like no one really cares. No one really cares about that issue. And it's just sort of like swept under the rug, go see a therapist, you'll be fine, blah, 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 blah. So that's the first scenario that can happen from all this. It's a lot of pressure. That's the first scenario. The second scenario is, and kind of what I did, and I think a lot of other guys do, which is you cope. Right? You cope. You find a way to cope. And most of us do this through addictions because addictions are a really easy way to sort of numb the pain so that you aren't struggling all the time, dealing with all these issues. And so, video games, porn, drugs like weed, alcohol, whatever. And then like constantly being on social media, right? Those are probably like the 4 big ones. Constantly being on social media and just scrolling, shorts, TikTok, constantly watching YouTube videos. These are all things that we get addicted to. And I think of someone, actually, I made a community post about this. And a guy in there, I don't know, maybe you're watching this video right now, but I really liked your comment where you said, I think that this is more of a symptom of the fact that, guys are dealing with these mental health issues like loneliness, lack of purpose, all these types of things. And I completely agree with that because I've been thinking over the past year, I'm like, why are so many guys addicted to these things? Why are so many guys addicted to porn? Why have I struggled with all these types of things? Porn, video game addiction, drugs, all these kinds of things. Why are we so like addicted to it? And I think there's more to it than just the fact that we, I think there's more to it than the fact that it's easy dopamine, right? Because when you go after these things, it's easy dopamine. It's an easy way for your brain to get that high. It's an easy way to relax. And I think that, yes, that is part of it. But I think that there's the root cause, and the root cause is more of what I've been talking about, which is, guys just are lonely. They don't have people to talk to. They don't have people to trust, and the pressure is immense to perform. And, there's just a general lack of purpose, in this society amongst young men. So I think that's really what's going on. And, I think that that's the second way that people cope is it's just a matter of addictions, right? It's just a matter of addictions. They're just coping. I think back to when I was addicted to video games, and it was really just me coping with the fact that, I had no friends, no girl, no social life. I had, nothing going on in terms of like a business or a job or a career or anything. So I would just cope, get out of that bad feeling, because the reality is we aren't just going to sit there and just feel like shit all day long. Humans are going to go do something that makes them feel good. And the downside is just that those things, those four addictions tend to be things that are really destructive, because what happens is it ends up making your mental health worse, which ends up being like basically a death spiral, right? So it's like, I feel like shit, so I'm going to go play video games, but then, it feels good in the moment. It's instant gratification, but then later on I feel more like shit, or I'm going to go, do porn, and then afterwards I feel even worse. So it's just a constant negative death spiral that comes in, and really is just so sad to see. And I know from experience, because I've been through this, and it's taken me a long time to kind of get to the point where I'm not addicted to these things. Obviously we all still make mistakes. You go for the quick dopamine, but I'm not addicted to them like I used to be, where I'd have to do them literally every single day for hours and hours and hours and hours. All right, so let's start getting into some solutions, because I just went through a lot of stuff that was pretty heavy, pretty dark, and I like to at least try to offer some ideas that I have, and I want to share at least what worked for me to kind of improve my mental health and overcome a lot of these addictions. So the reality of the situation is, I'm not making this video to ask the world to change. I'm not making this video as a plea to say, hey, recognize men's issues, recognize the fact that we're struggling with mental health, because I'm not delusional. And the reality is, people in general, they will care at least a little bit, but not enough to really make major change. So it's really up to us as individuals to make the change for ourselves, so that we can improve and kind of make our lives better, right? You can't rely on people to really do that, especially as men. And it's kind of just the truth. Like, we have to be accountable for what we can do. And while we recognize the bigger societal problems that are here and around us, like, that's not really going to change. So we might as well just make the change ourselves. And that's basically what I decided. Was like, yo, no one's coming to save me, bro. No one is coming to fucking save me. So I might as well do whatever I can to overcome these issues and try to at least improve, because otherwise, what's the point in even, continuing to try anything, really? We've really always been the more sort of replaceable, disposable sex, I guess, because if you think about it, women, they do like bear and bring in the next generation of the species. So it just makes sense that they, are more protected, and that we are more disposable, right? We're the ones that go to war. We're the ones that die in wars. And like, it is what it is. Like, you're not going to change that, right? So we might as well just focus in on what we can do. And so the first thing is, I would highly recommend that we start, or whoever is interested in whatever you can do, I would highly recommend like trying to find guys, other men that you can trust, who are interested in talking about these things, because that is one of the hardest things to overcome, right? Finding people who you can trust to talk about these mental health issues with, these addictions with, how to overcome them, kind of how to improve. Try to find people like that, because that's going to be one of the only ways that you can get out of the scenario I described earlier, where you're putting it all on the women that you're with, or the women in your family around you, and they kind of start to lose respect for you, because you're just constantly dumping your issues on them. Try to find other guys to communicate with, right? Try to find other guys that you can share this burden with, you can share your worries with. Back in the, I think it was 1800s, mostly 1800s, 1900s, like, they had gentlemen's clubs, right? And these were places where, like, I guess the more like elite, I guess you'd say more elite people would come and like come away from their domestic life, and they would come together to kind of share their worries, to talk, to sort of communicate and share news and things like this, right? Now, of course, someone in the comments is going to be like, oh, that's misogyny. Like, if you have like a men's club, blah, 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 that's misogyny. And it's like, well, I literally just described earlier in this video, sort of the problem that we're facing is that when we go to share these sort of issues with women, a lot of times it's not received well. A lot of times when you go to share these issues with society, it's not received well. They don't really want to hear it, right? And a lot of guys, they're insecure about sharing that vulnerable side with women. They're insecure about sharing it with men too, because they don't know if they could trust that guy, or if he's going to stab them in the back, or like, is he competitive or whatever. So this is the best option, is to find other guys that you trust, that you can communicate with, right? Whether that be in person or online. It's hard to find people in person in your local community, because everyone's sheltered inside, coping. Like I said earlier, they're fucking playing video games. They're constantly drunk. They're fucking jacking off to porn. So it's like, it's hard to find guys who are actually serious about this and interested in it. So you might have to go online, right? That's kind of what I did, is I kind of had to go online. I found a couple of friends that I could really trust and build friendship over time with. And that's what really kind of got me at that stage of feeling alone in terms of being like on the men's side of things, right? The second thing I would recommend is that you if you're single right now or you're a virgin or whatever, I would recommend that you try to fix that, because the fact of the matter is, as a young man, your testosterone is going to be high and naturally you're going to want to like have sex, right? And so if you don't get that issue fixed, right? If you don't get that issue fixed, you don't get that under lock, it's just so difficult to escape like the porn trap, right? It's just so difficult because the fact of the matter is your sexual energy is so strong and your chi is so strong that it's like trying to constantly battle porn is going to be a really big problem for you. So now I know trying to find a woman that you can date and have sex with is such a difficult thing these days, but I'm just saying keep that in mind as to one of the main reasons why it's going to be really difficult for you to get over the addictions, right? And the third thing is the addictions, right? Getting over these addictions, eliminating the porn, eliminating the video games, right? If you do look, the reality is this: if you do these things once in a while, it's like, well, yeah, you make mistakes. It's going to happen. You're going to slip up once in a while. But the point is, you don't want to be addicted to these things. You don't want to be literally every single day you have to do this, or, you have to do this like every single week for multiple hours, right? If you slip up, you slip up, right? If I go out and get drunk, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, I'm playing video games for, an hour. Oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. Let me reset. Let me figure out why that happened. So it's not the end of the world if you slip up, but the fact is you don't want to be addicted to these things. You don't want to be like you're a slave to it. And so that's why I say try to fix like the lonely aspect of your life, because a lot of times the reason why we're doing these things is because it's a lack of purpose, or we're just lonely. Like you don't either have a companion, like a female partner, or you don't have any male friends, or both, So yeah, just try to get those things sorted, and the addictions will take care of themselves. That's literally what happened to me. And when I fixed those things, and I got serious about actually solving those problems for myself, I didn't have a problem with addictions anymore, because my life was too full of actual real shit going on. My life was too full of, actually being with real people. So I didn't have time for all these addictions. And the real thing was actually better than the online addictions, right? And when you get on your sense of purpose and you're not lost, it gives you even more drive to kind of be focused in. And so that's the biggest thing that I can tell you. That's the most like advice I can give you in terms of what worked for me. All I know is that self-improvement does work to a point. Self-improvement will help you if you get on it. It's just you can't continue to try to do the whole thing where you're like the lone wolf. Oh, I'm gonna be alone. I don't have any male friends. Oh, I don't have any girlfriend. I'm not dating any girl. Like, dude, you're gonna have mental health problems. It's just gonna happen. You're gonna be addicted to shit. You're gonna have mental health problems. You cannot continue to just be alone. Humans are not made to be isolated. There's the rare few who can just be like a fucking hermit out in the woods, but I assume that's not you because you're watching this fucking video, right? Let me know in the comments what you think about us. Do you think I'm on point with some of this? Does some of this resonate with you? Do you think I'm completely wrong? What are your experiences been in life? Let me know down in the comments. And yeah, man, it's a crazy world. We just got to keep going. Just keep trying to better ourselves. Don't lose hope. That's the main thing. If you don't lose hope and you keep losing, or keep losing, yeah. If you don't lose hope and you keep losing, you'll keep losing. But like if you don't lose hope and you keep moving forward, eventually things will get better if you're taking intentional action steps.